It was another wild week in the Big 12, except for the fact that it wasn't at all. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from ESPN Central Texas. Thank you for making Locked On Big 12 your first listen every single day. Happy to have you here. Let's go through today a breakdown of last night, everything that happened on Saturday, who's going to Arlington now, and last but not least, who's getting fired because the time of the season is here. What happened to my conference? What happened to the league that I love so much? The parity that I've come to know, the joy that I have in the upsets and the any given Saturday and the Big 12 having some zany, crazy thing happen. You didn't get it. Now, while individual games were nuts, you take a blocked PAT in the UCF game. How about the long Iowa State touchdown there at the very end to make things interesting against Texas, or an Oklahoma team that barely came back to beat BYU, a 100-yard pick six, helping them with a 7-point deficit, 31-24 overall after being tied at halftime in Provo. What a wild week in that regard. But every team that was favored in this slate actually won the ball game. That doesn't register. That doesn't make a lot of sense in my brain because week in and week out, I tell you, right? I try to get at the front of the curve of who's going to upset who, because there's always like 2 or 3 upsets in the Big 12, and I try to predict it, and I'm always wrong. And here are some things. Here's what we learned. Here's what we learned this week. The Big 12 can be normal. The Big 12 can do normal things. And I do think we have learned about new versions of certain teams. Let me unpack this for you a bit. Unpack it with a BYU, for example. BYU at the beginning of the season felt like a juggernaut. They were mowing through folks. They had that road win against Arkansas. They beat Texas Tech even a few weeks ago, and you thought, okay, this team's a lock to go to a bowl game. Now sitting at 5-6. What you learned this week is they don't give up. There needs to be a change in the offensive staff, but they don't give up. Another great example, Texas Longhorns. Let's all have the conversation. It's going to be a tough conversation to have. They're likely going to go to Arlington. Now, I'm going to make the case in the second segment of ways to keep them out, but Texas is the best team in the Big 12. They have been the best team in the Big 12 all season long. They're 10-1 overall, and they'll likely play for a conference championship and ultimately win a conference championship on their way to a berth in the college football playoff. Let's see what shakes out in the ACC and the Pac-12 and how those finish up. But Texas looks as dangerous as anybody, and they have a road win against Alabama. I have tried to avoid that. And you might be sitting there thinking, oh, this guy's just petty. He doesn't want to root for Texas. He doesn't want to see Texas succeed. And you're damn right. You landed the plane there. But Texas is a good football team. And what I have learned is that Texas, despite adversity, despite injuries they faced against Iowa State, despite an injury to their quarterback Quinn Ewers a few weeks back, who is now in 100% form. I think he's there. This is the Quinn Ewers that we were used to at the beginning of the season. Not a Heisman caliber quarterback, but a very good college quarterback. Without a Jonathan Brooks, they're still plug and play. Next man up. Find somebody to make it tick. And CJ Baxter came out and was that guy. The freshman was that guy. And despite Rocco Becht, his best efforts at the very end of the game, who has risen up. We learned so much about Iowa State coming back from losing their starting quarterback and their starting running back. But then we also learned this week that Iowa State can't run the football. Maybe that Texas can stop the football. We learned that TCU, do they need to fire Kendall Briles, or is Baylor just that bad? Is he a guy who's on the hot seat, or is Baylor going to have to clean house entirely? Garrett Green. Oh my gosh. I wish that Garrett Green's stats matched the level of Garrett Green dog. Because I cannot come on here and justify calling Garrett Green one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the Big 12 from a statistics standpoint. I can't sit here and try to unpack for you that Garrett Green, who's thrown for 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns, is one of the top 5 QBs in this league. However, if you just watch him play, you think, oh, I want that guy on my team. I want that guy for my team. And you know what? Maybe one day I will make a case for him to be a top 5 quarterback in the Big 12. And a Jaheim White, who was so good running the football, a freshman at 5'7", slipping through everybody, having a career day for a couple of 100 yards against Cincinnati. And then what do we learn about Cincinnati? Is it a fluke that they won a Big 12 game? And then Houston comes out and competes. And is Oklahoma State back in form? They lost to UCF. They bounced back by scoring 43 points, but they did it against Houston, who we don't know if they're actually we do know that they're not very good. And then UCF UCF looks so promising. They are in a battle for a bowl game against Texas Tech this week, and they drop at 24-23 in a heartbreak. Up 14-0, tied at 14 at half. Tech's pulling the momentum in the second half, and UCF makes this late trek, and here they are with an opportunity to tie it, a blocked PAT, and there's still 5+ minutes to go. You know that UCF's got a shot to get the ball back and somehow find a way to at least make things interesting, and it's just not the way that it ends up working out. Tech does, well, what do we learn about Tech? They're nails. They can run a game. That Joey McGuire might be the best clock manager in the entire Big 12. It is not about learning where these teams were. It's not about, to me, I'll phrase it like this. It is not about revisiting where these teams were. It's about assessing where they are now, because for Texas Tech, you're not going to Arlington. You're not going to the conference championship game. However, we can talk about where you go in a bowl game and what your identity is going into 2024. At this point, for teams that are going to a bowl game, not going to a bowl game, anybody outside of the Big 12 championship conversation, we are now talking about how did this team finish the season? What did their last 3 games look like? And where do they go from here? If I'm a BYU, I am worried about that conversation. I am worried about who's going to lose their job in those conversations. If I'm a Texas, very excited to take that on. Can't wait to talk about that and get a little season in review, a little recap at the end of the year as you go into a possible Big 12 championship game. If I'm in Oklahoma, I think, oh man, we were rocky down the stretch. We weren't as good as we wanted to be in the last couple of games, and that's what we're getting. What a wild year in Big 12 football, and we have 1 week left of it. And now going into next week, these matchups mean everything. TCU at Oklahoma. The Horned Frogs can take the Sooners out of Big 12 championship contention, effectively out. I think there's like a wild, weird way that a 3-loss team could maybe do it right. Like the Texas Tech, if they beat Texas, and if TCU beats Oklahoma, and then if Iowa State goes and beats Kansas State, there's a couple other 3-loss teams, and BYU beats Oklahoma State, that's another 3-loss team. And then think about this, if West Virginia goes and they beat Baylor, that's another 3-loss team. There's a way to build a 3-loss team into the Big 12 championship game, but I don't think that all those dominoes are going to fall to make it happen. Instead, we get to sit back and enjoy one last week of the most entertaining conference in college football this season. And I pose that question to you. This is effectively me saying, hey, look, I'll unpack it the rest of the week, but I'm posing the question to you. How do you assess where your team is today? Not where they were in week 4 when they won against Arkansas on the road. Not where they were in week 3 when they went at Boise State and won a football game. Not where they were when they went on the road and they beat Pitt. Not where they went on the road and beat Alabama. Not when they lost to Ohio. Not when they lost to Texas State. Where is your team today going to a bowl game? And I'll address it in the third segment, especially. Where does your team go from a coaching staff standpoint? Are you squarely safe? Are you happy with everybody? Your OC, your DC? At this point, we are house cleaning. We are talking carousel. We are talking the future of this league as 4 new teams come in. This is the last week. This is the last week now. Happy Sunday. That these 14 teams are competing in the Big 12. 2 of them leaving, 4 newbies coming in next season. Cherish it while you can, because the Big 12 is about to get a complete facelift. Coming up, who's going to Arlington now? This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is sponsored by a special new sponsor, Listening.com. Listening.com is an app that turns academic papers, textbooks, PDFs, websites, and emails into audio so you can listen to them on the go instead of sitting at a desk to read. This app frees you up so you can learn from anywhere. It's the best app in the world for listening to academic material. They can read math equations automatically, skip citations and footnotes, and can pronounce difficult technical words. This is one of those ads where I read it and I say, oh, I already have this. Listening.com. I'm not a big note-taking guy. At listening.com, you can one-click note. Click the plus note button while listening. They'll put that sentence into a notepad. Automatic chapter detection for you. Data tables. Pull all the data tables. You can review them visually inside the app as well. Their users, 50% PhDs, 30% college students, 20% working professionals. So the way that I do it, I don't like to sit. I don't like to read. I want to be cleaning my room. I want to be, hey, look, I'm in the shower, intimate. I want to listen to article from Pete Thamel. Bam, boom, pop it in. That 3-4 minute article turns basically into a podcast. Right now, normally users get a 2-week free trial. With this link, you'll get a free extra week. Your first 3 weeks are free at listening.com/locked on. That is listening.com/locked on. So when we talk Big 12 championship, things are still complex. That's the first thing that I want to echo and push through, that there are still so many teams in contention here. And this is a caveat that needs to be said. It didn't need to be said a week ago, but it needs to be said now. The Big 12 could still change the rules. That's what we just learned, right? They went and they said, hey, we're going to clarify some of these rules for you and make it a little clearer. You didn't clarify, you changed, you added on, because one day Kansas State was in the Big 12 championship, and then the next day, the right thing happened and Oklahoma State was in the Big 12 championship. Yes, it was the right thing. Should you have changed it mid-season? Not for me to decide, but to say it was a clarification and not a complete change was wrong. So let's first and foremost understand that everything I'm about to tell you could change tomorrow when Brett Yormark goes, the only teams that can go to a Big 12 championship are ones that start with B and end in Baylor, and those that start with B and end in YU. Obviously, that's facetious, but it's how frustrated I would be if I'm a Kansas State fan watching what the Big 12 did when they changed the rules. There are somehow 7 teams that are in this conference that I'm going to bring into the conversation. Texas Tech, Iowa State, West Virginia, Kansas State, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Texas. 7 fan bases can listen to this segment right now and say, I somehow have a say in this. I somehow have something to play for this week. And it is wild that we're having a conversation about that many teams this late in the year. The reason why there are so few teams with 2 losses or 3 losses in Big 12 play playing one another, and those that are going to give you an opportunity to create the ultimate chaos. Let me paint you this picture. Follow along with me. TCU beats Oklahoma, dropping the Sooners to 6-3 in Big 12 play. Texas Tech beats Texas. Tech would then be 6-3 in Big 12 play. Texas 7-2. Iowa State beats Kansas State. Both of those teams 6-3 in Big 12 play. Oklahoma State loses to BYU. Oklahoma State 6-3 in Big 12 play. West Virginia beats Baylor. At that point, West Virginia 6-3 in Big 12 play. In this scenario, listen clearly, in this almost impossible but somehow possible scenario, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Kansas State, West Virginia, Iowa State, and Texas Tech. 6 teams are all dead even with a 6-3 record in conference play and a chance to go to Arlington. In that maximum chaos scenario that would fit the Big 12 that has been so parity bound this year, in that scenario, Texas at 7-2, 10-2 overall because of the loss to Texas Tech, who is now in that conglomerate of tied teams. They get to go to Arlington. They march to Arlington. We are talking Iowa State and Texas Tech, who are 6-5 right now, have an opportunity to go. In this scenario, too, if you're Iowa State, your loss to Texas, how much is it going to hurt you? Your loss to Oklahoma is going to hurt you, and then Oklahoma beat Texas, but then Oklahoma lost to Oklahoma State. But then Oklahoma State also beat Kansas State. But Kansas State, they got to win against Iowa State. As I start to put it together, here is where the Big 12's rules get even more vague. So this is why people have been asking questions to the Big 12 of, hey, in the event that there is a 3-team tie, what do you do? In the event now of a 6-team tie, do you say, okay, wait a second, Kansas State has beaten Oklahoma. Kansas State has beaten Oklahoma, or make it Oklahoma State has beaten Oklahoma. Oklahoma State has beaten Kansas State. Does that mean that they get to go? Because Oklahoma State, their losses, what's going to help them is one of their losses is to UCF, who's not in this conversation, so they can't get a head-to-head. The UCF cannot leverage that head-to-head. Does that make sense? However, you did lose to Iowa State, but that's the same Iowa State team that lost to Texas, but Texas now is already in, so they're out of the conversation. But at the same time, they lost to Oklahoma, who's in the conversation. Mind-blowing. At this point, we would have to unpack everything to figure out common opponents, who beat who, what's the head-to-head. I've got to figure out there's a metric you can get to where it's point totals and strength of schedule and conference strength of schedule and how many wins you've got overall. It is baffling that we could get to that point, but that is just me giving you the doomsday emergency scenario. What do I think is going to happen here? I think Kansas State beats Iowa State at home, moving themselves to 7-2 in Big 12 play. I do think Oklahoma is going to win against TCU at home, moving them to 7-2 in Big 12 play. I think Texas beats Texas Tech. They're going to lock themselves into the Big 12 championship. At this point, if you've heard me correctly, this is Kansas State at 7-2, Oklahoma 7-2, Texas 8-1. UT, you're in. Another team that's going to be 7-2, tied right there with Kansas State and Oklahoma. Kansas State and Oklahoma. Oklahoma State, they're going to beat BYU at home. They're in Stillwater. Thursday game, move to 7-2. If you're keeping score, that is now 3 teams that I have finishing this week tied at 7-2. West Virginia will beat Baylor, but at 5, it will beat Baylor, but at 6-3, it doesn't matter. Kansas will beat Cincinnati 5-4. They're out of the equation. There is now no Iowa State. They just lost to Kansas State. They're 5-4 out of the equation. There is no Texas Tech. They're 5-4. Just lost to Texas out of the equation. This would create the exact same scenario that we currently have in Big 12 play that Brett Yormark just clarified. When Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and Kansas State are tied somewhere in this, Oklahoma State, because they have the head-to-head win against both of those teams, will move forward. That's it. That's the way this is going to play out. I'm calling it today, Sunday, November 19th, that Texas will play Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. Ollie Gordon, you get your shot. Quinn Ewers, you get your shot. Texas wants to win a Big 12 championship and go out the right way. Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy can ruin that and wipe away the bad taste of 2021 when they could have won it at the goal line and didn't get in. For Oklahoma, for Kansas State, a couple of weeks ago, by rule, you would have been in the conference title game. The way that there was what's your record against common opponents? But we've changed that now. We didn't change it. We clarified it. But given the matchups this week, unless Oklahoma State does something disastrous, give me Texas, Oklahoma State, Longhorns, Cowboys, Big 12 championship. Who's getting fired? This Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go to make money. I specifically love going and betting on Big 12 teams. I bet on Iowa State this weekend. So I didn't win money on Iowa State, but I also bet on Kansas State money line. Had a lot on their money line in parlays, and that's one of the best parts of FanDuel is you can have parlays, player props, over-unders, fun spreads, and a wide range of spreads there with Big 12 teams and those abroad across college football, the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, and new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. So you go in, you say, look, I got Oklahoma State moneyline this week over BYU. You place that $5 bet. If it hits, you get $150 in bonus bets. Score early this NFL season as well with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel.com/locked on to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of the National Football League. Okay, who's going to lose their job? The first thing I want to emphasize here is this a tough conversation for people to it's a tough conversation for me because as someone who is at an ESPN affiliate, has gotten to work closely with the Baylor staff and staffs of multiple college football teams, be behind the scenes. I know these people have families. I see their families every week. I see them in the stands. I see their kids, where their kids go to high school. I cover those games. I'm hanging out with these people day in and day out in the trenches. And so many of them are good people. They are genuinely kind-hearted. They've had success at other schools. You cannot have had no success in a career to get to a Power 5 level, to get to the Big 12. You have to at some point along the line. You didn't get lucky. You were a good football coach in some respect, in some regard, to get here. That said, I'm going to put it like this. If you work in sales and you go 2 years without making a sale, or you work in sales and your sales goal for your company is to sell $250,000 in product, $100,000 in product, and you sell a third of that, you finish 4 and 8 in sales. After 2 years of that, you're going to get fired. You are now costing the company money. You are costing the company money in the same way coaches are costing their company, their school, revenue from donors, from attendance, from TCU brought in $3 billion in media revenue from their run to the national championship last year. When you win like that, you bring money to your employer. If I tomorrow had my goals as a podcast host, as a radio host, if for 2 years, 3 years, I didn't get ratings, I'm going to get fired. If I didn't do my job to the level it was supposed to be due, I'm going to get fired at level it's supposed to be done, that is. And the craziest part for you, the salesperson, for me, the podcaster, the radio host, I don't get the rest of my $30 million, right? I'm not getting $30 million here. Maybe you are, but that's not coming to us. We don't get the big buyout or any of that. In college football, you accept the high stakes of the job and you go. Now, I want to bring up that word stakes a little bit as well in the context of why these guys are being fired. Fans root for that word. In my opinion, people are more interested in stakes than they are winning. The best part of a World Series victory, the best part of your team winning the Super Bowl or national championship, to me, is always the day before, the night before, the morning of. The moment it happens is great, but it's the high stakes that lead up to it. It's the build-up. It's the games prior that have created this atmosphere that makes winning so fun. The crux, the importance, the climax is there, certainly necessary, but the build-up to that moment, the stakes that create the moment are what are most important. We all care more about stakes than we do winning. STAKES. I believe that. Now, it's tough to admit because everybody says, winning is fun. We want to win. Winning is good. True. But a lot of these teams, a lot of these fan bases that are upset are missing stakes. When's the last time you had that Houston had a high pressure game where it felt like, we're playing for something big here? The stakes are really high. Been a bit. For Baylor, you didn't have stakes this season. To go to a bowl game, yeah, but that's not where you want to be after winning a Sugar Bowl a couple years ago, seeing the stakes of a Big 12 championship. If you're a TCU, you're saying, we just saw the highest stakes, a national championship, and now we had to go a sleeper 42-17 over Baylor, and for what? For some stupid trophy? For nothing? Fans miss what it's like to compete for the highest prizes, for the biggest moments in sports. And when a coach cannot deliver that, when a coach cannot, look at like a Penn State, look at a Mark Richt at Georgia, or now at Penn State of James Franklin. Those guys aren't winning the biggest games, but they are still in their position because they've created stakes. They've created high pressure, big moments for fans to latch onto. And there are a lot of coaches in the Big 12 that haven't. So right now, will Dana Holgorsen be here next year? I don't know. Has he bought himself time with a win in Big 12 play over Baylor a couple weeks ago? I don't know. I think he's in the short list of guys that could be gone. Will Neil Brown win 8 games and get to stick around at West Virginia? I think he's earned that. I think he's earned another year at West Virginia. Have we deduced that he's probably not the guy that's going to win a Big 12 championship at that school? I also think that's the case. But he deserves one more year based off of this past season. Is it rightful? In college football, there's a quick draw. There's a quick pull, and the guy's gone. I don't know, but he's likely going to get a shot. Dave Aranda, does he come back to Baylor? He shouldn't, but he likely will. So now, do we see teams truly put up the fact that, hey, we want to be an elite athletic department. We want to raise the stakes. We want to play in those big moments. We're willing to make a change. We love these people as people, but they didn't get it done as a head coach. Is your school willing to have the gumption, the gall, to pull the trigger on an offensive court, on a Jeff Levy, on a Kendall Briles, on an A-Rod? So we'll find out very soon. With Christmas comes the firings. This has been, it always will be. Let's come back tomorrow. Let's do some power rankings. I'd love to talk to you then. If you need anything, send me a message. Tell me hello. I like talking to you guys. I missed you yesterday. This has been, it always will be, Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.